Hi everyone, Syndicate Telios here bringing you a multiple-part series guide on Lightside Geo Territory Battle. I have my SWGO information and the link to our Syndicate recruitment server below. Part 1 of this video series will cover platooning. The left list contains the ground characters that are most required across all of Lightside Geo Territory Battle. This is not broken down per phase, as we will break down each phase later in the video. The right list contains all the ship characters that are most required across all of Lightside Geo Territory Battle. This is also not broken down per phase, as we will break that down later. Most notable ground points: CLS, Jedi Knight Revan, and Rey Jedi Training, the three most powerful leadership abilities, are also the top three in platoons. Really no shock here, although I'd note that the needs of each of these vary by phase. Continuing down the list, we see some of the most powerful supports in C-3PO, Hermit Yoda, and BB-8, and others. Shaak Ti and Grandmaster Yoda are also high on the list, as well limiting your best secondary Jedi team leadership and clone leadership outside of General Skywalker. As you move further down the list, some of these become less impactful, looking at you, pal, but you'll see Han, Chewie, and Baze sitting around 11 each. Also notice that General Skywalker is sitting at 10. It's important to note that the 10 General Skywalkers needed are for Platoon Phase 3 only. He's needed nowhere else. The most notable ship points are Han Millennium Falcon being at the top, which makes perfect sense as it's one of the most powerful single ships in the game. The new pay-to-win ships like the Y-Wing, Vulture Droid, and Hyena Bomber are also at the top of the list. That means it's going to be very difficult to complete ship platoons early on here, as most guilds won't have 3 of those even. From there, the ships get a little less impactful, but good tank utility ships like Biggs and Plo and Rex are in the double digits here as well. Here is a list of Lightside factions to think about when considering Lightside Geo Territory Battle. We have Jedi, Rebels, Rogue One, and Phoenix, 501st, Clones, and Galactic Republic, and then we kind of have a separate set of Ewoks, Scoundrels, Old Republic, and Resistance. After reviewing the top needs for platoons, let's consider a few of the most meta teams. You can see the obvious issues right away. With Jedi Knight Revan and Grandmaster Yoda will be in platoons. That immediately makes you consider that Jedi Knight Revan leadership is probably not viable for everyone, and even Grandmaster Yoda's leadership will unlikely be an option. For CLS, we see he is a high requirement for platoons, leaving the typical powerful rebel squad without a leadership. For Padme team, there are only 4 Padmes required in all of Lightside Geo Territory Battle, making her a prime leadership to use. An honorable mention here is not Jedi Training Rey. There are a lot of Jedi Training Rey needed for platoons, so Resistance will also be one that's going to be platooned quite a bit over the course of Lightside Geo Territory Battle. Let's look at a tier list of Jedi leads. The number in brackets are how many platoons are needed across all of Lightside Geo Territory Battle. The S tier list is Jedi Knight Revan, obviously the best leadership of the bunch, premium, arena-worthy, and meta-defining. He brings things like assists, protection recovery, and a whole bunch more, including stats, and just overall one of the most powerful leadership abilities in the game. So he will obviously be at the top of the list. Your A tier list would include things like Grandmaster Yoda. He's what I would consider the second best Jedi lead, especially with his Zeta. He adds a host of benefits on top of him being a powerful character. If Jedi Knight Revan is unavailable, Grandmaster Yoda with his Zeta is probably your second best bet. He needs to be paired with a way to regenerate protection, which I would consider Hoda a prime benefit for him. I also consider General Kenobi's leadership to be great. He's also one of the ones that's really good paired with things like Barriss and Hoda. He gives huge staying power and the ability to protect DPS on a team while taking advantage of full team heals for assists and buffing Jedi. I also put on the A tier Imagundi. So this one's probably will be the most questionable one for a lot of people. As it's kind of a weird placement for an A tier leadership. But counter can be super strong, especially if we're up against the likes of like B1 battle droids that we're going to be removing stacks from. So, if a B1 does an AoE and your whole team counters, you remove a bunch of B1 stacks, and all of a sudden the powerful droid teams become a little bit less powerful. Obviously, Imagundi will need to be paired with the likes of Hoda or other team healing, as you won't have any protection recovery. And again, this is one of those ones that's theoretical because we don't know the exact enemies or the exact kits that are going to be needed over the course of the territory battle. Going down the list, I have in the B tier, we have Bastila. I think Bastila lead is very strong, but not in the long run. So the problem with Bastila is her leadership loses its effect as the overshield starts going down. And if we know anything about territory battles, it's that these characters do a lot of damage. So that overshield is not going to last for a really long time, which means that as the fights go on, you're going to have less and less power from a Bastila lead team. Next I would put Barris. She adds a max health percentage and the ability to regenerate life, which I think is going to be quite likely key in light side Geo territory battle, as we have a very limited number of characters that can regenerate protection, so healing is good. She's not as good as General Kenobi, but usable if you run out of higher tier options. Another B tier is Jedi Knight Anakin. He adds a bunch of offense and crit damage, which is nice, but not much else. So you're going to be really worried about how do you regenerate health and protection. So I would consider him limited. However, there are no platoons needed at all for Jedi Knight Anakin, making him, in a pinch, someone you can use as a leadership and someone who will probably be on a lot of teams. And then I have Qui-Gon Jinn, also in the B tier list. This is a legacy character that might have decent use. The ability to spread foresight a lot if you are killing stuff might be viable. I kind of see his leadership akin to Imperial troopers, and that you have to snowball to make the foresight effect really work for you. As soon as your foresight is gone or you can't really start chain killing enemies to keep that up, I think the team will fall apart really fast. Now, there are 0 of him needed for platoons as well, so he's a character that we should consider usable over light side Geo territory battle. When we get down to C tier, we're going to be kind of stretching here. This is your Luminara, your Old Ben, your Ahsoka, evasion leaderships that might be nice to have with a little bit of healing, but generally everything above this is a much better option. If you're dipping down to your C tier or what I consider your unusable Jedi leaderships, I think you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So you really don't want to have to use the C tier characters as leads, but I thought I would throw them out there as some people may be able to make effective teams out of them if they have high relics or something to that effect. Let's look at a tier list of Rebel leads. In the S tier, I have Hera. This might come as a surprise to a lot of people, but Hera is basically like the glue for a Phoenix team. If you don't platoon her, then Phoenix should be a very viable team to run. My Phoenix is currently Relic 5, and they are really absolutely a super strong lead, especially in PvE. They do like everything. Especially the more Zetas you add to them, the more powerful they get. My Relic 5 Phoenix team, I think, is going to be one of my staple go-tos for light side. I think they generate tons of turn meter, they generate protection, they have extra crit chance, and Hera has a revive. And then they do percent damage, and they just, as a team, kind of have everything we think we're going to need for this light side Geo territory battle. And I think the more relic levels you have on them, the stronger they're going to be. CLS is also an S tier. Not really much needs to be said about him. Premium team lead, really good with the meta rebel team. But there are a lot of him needed for platoons, 44 over the course of the territory battle, so quite a bit. Now looking down at the A tier, I have Zeta Jen. The Zeta on her leadership is actually really, really good. On top of that, her kit is actually really, really good too. So, protection recovery is going to be one of the main staples of this light side geo territory battle, as I think protection and being able to play around getting protection back gives you staying power, and that gives you more longevity as the fights go on. This is very akin to kind of how Bosk leadership works. And you know, the stronger your Bosk teams are, the harder they are to take down. And eventually, if you get enough relic levels on Bosk, they can't actually kill him. And then the more debuffs you apply for a Bosk team, the harder it is to kill him even more. So Jin leadership is akin to Bosk. Again, since she has protection recovery, I think in a pinch she works in place of CLS. She's almost S tier worthy because of her kit. But I do have concerns about any rebel team landing enough debuffs to trigger her leadership ability, the expose. Other than that, I think she has a great kit, including a revive. So if you're looking for a rebel team revive option, Jin is going to be one of the best ones that you can run, especially over like a Captain Han Solo who basically doesn't do anything. I think Jin is very worthy of an A tier. I mean, you also notice that she has 0 platoons for her. So when you're looking at staple rebel teams, you're going to be able to use a Zeta Jin leadership over something like a CLS and still run a nice, strong rebel team. Looking down at the tier list a little bit further, we have B tiers. I think Stormtrooper Han, he has a nice chunk of defense for your whole team. You can use him as a tank to generate TM for the rest of the team, and he can tank up a lot of attacks, especially with his Zeta. I have a Relic 5 Stormtrooper Han, and I used him in a GAC one time, and he stood for like 2.5 minutes against 5 others on a team, and they just kept hitting him and kept hitting him, and he didn't go down. So he has tons and tons of staying power, which I think is going to be really important on top of all the other things that he does. The reason that I have him on the leadership list is because he adds defense when he's in the leadership slot. So if you put something like defensive sets on him and put him in the leadership spot and have his Zeta, then you have a very, very, very tanky character, which I think is going to be important. I think staying power in this territory battle is going to be a big deal. And then we have something like Wedge as a B tier, probably a surprise, but crits generating TM and healing will be a big deal in this territory battle. And I think healing in general, especially if you don't have any prot recovery, healing is going to be very important. So he's a legacy character. I think you're going to have high relic levels on Wedge or anything that you run with Wedge because you're going to want that extra health. But I think if you're moving down the list and you're trying to figure out how to run rebels, he might be an option. Again, I think you're going to need high health for that to work for him, but he's on there. I'm looking at C tiers. We have things like Obi-Wan Kenobi, Admiral Akbar, and Farm Boy Luke. These are all almost unusable, I would say, but slightly better than ones listed as unusable, like Leia, Lando, Rolo, Lobot. I would avoid using anything that's in the C tier or the unusable tier. I know a lot of people might argue that Admiral Akbar is a little bit better, but Admiral Akbar relies on characters not doing damage in order for other characters to do damage. And I think that's a really risky pick when you're talking about territory battles, because kind of the whole idea is you want to kill a couple of things really, really fast to minimize the damage that's being output. And then you want to control the fight until you move on to the next wave. And I think pairing Admiral Akbar with a bunch of characters that are going to facilitate kind of the assists that his leadership has, I don't think it's going to work out very well. I might be proven wrong, but I don't think so. I think you're seeing C tier and unusable leaderships here, that this list is fairly spot on. Let's look at a list of 501st, Clone, and Galactic Republic leads. In your S tier, we have your GSW. If you have a GSW 7-star, he's going to be an ideal lead for this light side geo territory battle. Able to keep coming back over and over again, protecting the team is certainly a powerful ability, along with everything else he does, from increasing cooldowns to armor shred, etc., etc. He's a must-have lead for for this territory battle. And I think of all the leads that you can pick, he's definitely up there. Additionally, we're going to need 10 7-star GSWs for platoons. So at some point, at least 10 people in your guild are going to have to 7-star him, aside from wanting to have him 7-star to use in other aspects of the game. And then from there we have Padme. She's an ideal Galactic Republic lead, as you can plug and play almost any other Galactic Republic with her. The biggest downside with her is the fixed speed that can't be manipulated. That's a blessing and a curse, as a lot of times you can snowball teams based off of outspeeding your opponent. You need a tank, preferably GK with her, to make sure Squishy or DPS don't get taken out. But there are only 4 Padmes required for platoons across the whole light side geo territory battle. So that means Padme is going to be very powerful as a leadership, as she can be used in quite a bit of the areas that don't require specifics like Jedi or whatever. And then my last S tier that I have up there with General Skywalker is Shakti. So I think she's a premium leadership for clones if she's available. She's better than Zeta Cody, and the best option if you don't have General Skywalker. I think her leadership is the best. I think she's actually a little, for me, for PvE, I think she actually edges out General Skywalker. But again, look at the requirement. There's going to be 20 of her needed for platoons, so that's going to really limit the amount of 501st and or clones that you can run. I think she's really good. I think she adds a whole host of stats. So if you run like Shakti with the 501st trio and Sarge or Cody, you're going to get very powerful clones that have a lot of staying power because they have that protection recovery, as well as just a huge chunk of stats that she applies with her leadership. So I think she's really, really good. I think she's going to be one of the best for those teams across light side geo territory battle. In my A tier, I have Zeta Cody. So I know he's kind of a legacy character, but again, we've talked about this a lot. Protection recovery is going to be a premium in this, and Cody does exactly that, protection recovery, on top of adding a huge amount of defense for your clones. So if you run Cody with something like the 501st trio and Sarge, I think you're going to have a very tanky clone team. And since 5 has been upgraded to actually provide a taunt. He actually taunts now. On top of having a huge amount of defense himself, he's going to be able to protect the rest of the team and let them regen their protection. So I think Zeta Cody is definitely worthy of an A tier. And then I have 5s. So again, we talked about protection recovery. Well, 5s gives you protection recovery over 2 turns when your clone team takes a hit. So I'm sorry, takes a crit. So this is not as good as some of the others, but I think it's up here. I think it's worth considering as if you get something that does a lot of crits with low damage, like maybe if you take stacks off of a B1 and for some reason B1s and this can crit, if they crit you like over and over again, that could potentially add a lot of protection recovery under a 5's lead. I have Rex here with the 501st. So we've kind of seen Rex lead in the Geo territory battle and how annoying that can be. I think it's not going to be near as good when we're using our teams against Darkside. But I think if you're moving down the list and you're running out of options, I think Rex with 501st, giving you a lot of TM as you're taking damage and feeding more turn meter to the rest of your clone team could be very, very good. And then I think when you take Rex and you put him with others, like with just Galactic Republic or not the 501st team, he kind of moves down the list quite a bit to the B tier. And then in the C tier or the unusable, we have things like Jedi Knight Anakin and Clone Wars Chewie. I think if you are reaching for Jedi Knight Anakin and Clone Wars Chewie or Plo as your lead, I think you're going to be in a lot of trouble making these teams work for you. But Jedi Knight Anakin does add damage with clones, which is always nice because, if you can kill everything before it kills you, that's one of the ways that we kind of manage these territory battles. But yeah, I think this is kind of a relatively simple list of the leaderships for 501st clones in Galactic Republic. Let's look at a tier list of other light side team leads. In the S tier, I have Chief Chirpa. Ideal lead for the Ewoks, huge TM generation and a great kit. Perfect overall synergy for the Ewok team. A lot of people might look at this and be like, Ewoks in an S tier? What? If you've never faced Relic 5 or higher Ewok team with good mods, then you probably don't understand why I have this in an S tier. But the Ewok team, once they get rolling, is really insane. They generate huge amounts of turn meter. They can apply daze, they remove TM, they add foresight and buffs, and Paplo is like unkillable as long as you're spreading a bunch of buffs. Yeah, it's a really great team. So in my S tier, I definitely have the Ewoks with Chief Chirpa lead here at the very top. And considering that there aren't many platoons for Ewoks at all, I think this team's going to be very usable over light side Geo territory battle. And then the second that I have in my S tier is Jedi Training Ray. Premium resistance lead with the crazy effect of adding exposes on crit. Built with other resistance, they can put out a ton of damage, control the fight, team manipulation. But that's if you can actually use her. So you notice there are 28 of her on platoons. There are also a lot of supporting characters for resistance like BB-8, C-3PO, Finn even has a lot of platoon requirements. So yeah, Jedi Training Ray is going to be super strong, S tier. That is if you have the chance to actually use her, because I think she's gonna end up being in platoons quite a bit. My A tier, I have Kira. She's borderline S tier for me because of her synergy with Han and Chewie and other scoundrels. Again, we talked about prot regeneration. She helps regenerate protection. So if you have to platoon CLS, which we've already seen, there are going to be a lot of platoons for him. Then this will definitely be a go-to leadership for other scoundrels. Very powerful with double tank, like maybe Stormtrooper Han and L3, or other auto taunts that can kind of taunt trade and regenerate their own protection and stuff like that. Kira, very powerful. I think almost deserving of S tier, but definitely a very solid A tier for me, especially with the other synergies that she has. Moving down the list to B tier, I mentioned Stormtrooper Han in the Rebel section. It applies here as well because he's a scoundrel. I have Karth here and B tier, and I think questionably he should be even C tier, potentially even unusable in my opinion. So Karth himself, I think, is an okay character, but the problem is I think landing dots to make his leadership work is going to be very sketchy. We've seen that in Geo territory battle in the later phases, landing debuffs at all is almost impossible. So in order for Karth leadership to work, you have to land a bunch of dots. I'm not sure that's going to happen. And then on top of that, you'll be missing the most powerful DPS that's on the team in Canderous, who is a dark side character. So not only do you have the challenge of landing dots, but you also lose your strongest Old Republic DPS that goes with this team. I don't think it's going to work out very well. He doesn't have any platoon requirements, but I think an Old Republic team built around Karth is going to be really bad. Probably C tier, maybe even unusable. But hey, maybe someone will find a use for him, and maybe in some phases or some situations it'll work okay. And then I have Finn. Obviously, you have to have a Zeta to make this work. Not near as good as Jedi Training Ray. Gonna have a much harder time controlling TM and controlling the fight. On top of that, he has to be run with very specific other resistance characters that apply expose because his leadership doesn't give you any extra ability to apply. So you have to rely on the kits from other characters. There are also 19 of him needed for platoon, so Finn is on the list as a B tier, but I think he's almost even borderline C tier as well, as I think using him is going to be very difficult, as you're going to be relying on landing exposes. Um, yeah. I mean, his leadership is good because it gives you a bunch of stats and stuff. And expose is obviously very good, but I think it's going to be a really hard time using Fen. And then lastly on the list, I have Tebow. So for a lot of people, that probably raises eyebrows, like why is Tebow even on the list? Well, he's kind of interesting to think about. Unlikely to be any kind of like high tier leader, but he does have a ubiquitous lead, which allows your team to gain stealth. And basically, when he gains stealth, they have a 50% chance to gain 25% turn meter at the end of their turn. So basically, he effectively adds 12.5% speed to your entire team. If he's in the leadership. So that's nothing to shake a stick at. Is he going to be like as good as the others that I've mentioned? Probably not. But it might be worth noting that there are some team comps that maybe hide the rest of your DPS behind a tank or two, and Tebow could be, viable maybe. I guess we'll see. Now that we've gone over the top platoon requirements and the leadership for all the light side factions and their rankings, let's put that information together into team compositions. Looking at Jedi teams, let's discuss a few options. This is not an exhaustive list as the teams end up looking the same, but this provides some options to think about. Jedi Knight Revan will remain the premium lead if you can use him, pairing him with Old Republic Jedi and or any Jedi likely will be one of the best teams that you can run. Grandmaster Yoda with the Zeta on leadership is also very viable. Use him with Hoda for the protection, regeneration, and master's training buff, Ayala for the stun, and Plo for the offense and defense up, which synergizes nicely with Yoda's buffs, and a Dispel on basic, and likely another tank or reviving Jedi. For your A tier, we have General Kenobi. Run General Kenobi with double healers like Barriss and Hoda in order to trigger additional assists. Add Plo in there for a Dispel on basic as well as the defense up buff so you can have it up all the time. And the fifth slot here should likely be something like damage. You can consider someone like Ezra who gives himself additional offense and can use his low cooldown special as an additional cleanse. Lastly, I would have Imagandi as he provides counter chance to allies. So characters like Ayala, Hoda, and Barriss provide stuns, healing, cleanses from their basic while making Jedi's tankier with the Master's buff. A fifth should be a taunting tank, reviver, or another damage dealer with utility. For B, C, and unusable Jedi leaders, I'm not convinced the leadership will help any team comp survive, so I'm not listing those as potential possibilities. A lot of the B and C tier Jedis will still consist of the same characters above, as they're the most powerful in the set. Looking at Rebel teams, let's discuss a few options. This is not an exhaustive list of teams, but provides some options to think about. CLS will remain the premium lead if you can use him. Pairing him with the standard Rebel should provide plenty of control, offensive power, and everything else to get through any of the phases. Hera with Phoenix minus Ezra. We take Ezra out as he is a Jedi and a great addition to almost any Jedi team. Phoenix brings everything you need to be successful in light side territory battle, including protection, regeneration, counters, healing, percent base damage, revives, and tons of damage through Sabine with her Zeta. A good Phoenix team with relics should be a top tier choice. Jyn and Rogue One. Jyn brings a nice leadership with her Zeta. Modded correctly, Rogue One rebels can get a lot of health, which makes chariots heal over time more valuable. Jyn also brings a stun, team control, and revive in the event that one of your tanks go down. Running Jyn is ideal to have a second tank, which allows you to regenerate prot between taking fire on someone like Baze. I do not recommend K2SO as I think he's pretty bad. I also think that Cassian might be okay, but the amount of resisting debuffs will probably make him quite a bit worse than he is normally. Looking at something like Stormtrooper Han plus Rogue One, we can see Stormtrooper Han is an interesting option as he provides a big chunk of defense for the team. He can taunt switch with bays, both will be very tanky. You miss out on the protection regeneration, but your team becomes a lot tankier from the defense, making potentially squishier characters like Chirrut and Jyn less likely to get one shot. Then you have your wedge lead. This would require a mid to high relic tier with 6E mods with health primaries. But wedge lead could allow you to run a crit-based rebel team, which could regenerate health based on crits. And with a double tank setup, and the crit from Wigs and Chariot, you could very likely survive and have a team that just basically revolves around using that health pool instead of using like protection, for instance. This is less ideal of a setup, but not outside the realm of being good if you have invested relics and have good mods on that particular team. For C tier Rebel leaders, I'm not convinced leadership will really help the team comp survive, so I'm not listing those as possibilities when thinking about kind of off-brand Rebel teams. So a lot of other Rebel comps will consist of the characters listed above. Looking at 501st Clone and Galactic Republic teams, let's discuss a few options. General Skywalker will be the best 501st lead option if you have him at 7-star, but that does require you to pull Ahsoka unless you have ARC Trooper 7-star and he's not even released yet, and geared. In order to fill out that team. It's quite a stretch at this point, but I think he'll eventually be one of the best leads for almost all the content in the game. With that being said, I think Shakti plus 501st plus Cody or Sarge. This is a much more realistic view of what a clone team will probably be like in the early stages. Shakti provides an amazing leadership as well as a host of great abilities to support the clone team. The best part about this is even though Shakti is a Jedi, she really only synergizes with clones, so you won't ever really run her with Jedi. So you're not really sacrificing a Jedi in order to make this team work. For Padme, Padme is going to be very powerful leadership and light side geo territory battle. The ability to do percent-based damage will be quite strong, as well as all the other benefits of her leadership. The meta Padme team will certainly be one of the strongest, but generally you're going to need those Jedi on the all Jedi squads. This leads me to suggest that the Padme plus 4 other Galactic Republic characters might be a comp that we end up seeing a lot. Since her leadership isn't very specific, you compare her with quite a bit of other characters and still get a solid outcome. Examples would be Padme plus 501st, Padme plus R2, Clone Wars Chewie and 2 others, or something like Padme and Leftover Jedi, depending on what you have available. Obviously, these other characters will still need to be geared and modded appropriately, but Padme's leadership opens up options to help your roster if you end up being stretched quite thin, which is very likely. And then as you move down the list, we have things like Cody, Fives, and Rex leader with the 501st. These are all A-tier options, Cody being the better of the options, I think, with his Zeta, in my opinion. Especially because he provides the protection regeneration as well as defense. Fives and Rex offer some other abilities as well, but probably aren't as good as anything that I listed above. There are other Galactic Republic leaderships that I mentioned earlier, but I think these really are the ones that are going to matter the most. If you start getting into the BEC or unusable Galactic Republic leaderships, I think you're probably looking at minimal waves, and I think you're going to struggle pretty hard to be effective. Looking at Ewoks, Scoundrels, Old Republic, and Resistance, let's discuss a few options. For Ewoks, we're going to be running CC lead. CC is much better than Tebow, so if you run Ewoks for regular combat missions, CC is basically required. I think Ewoks generally lack on damage, so you'll need relic levels to likely punch through harder waves. Keeping EE and stealth means you always have a revive as someone goes down, unless there's some kind of anti-revive mechanic. Pablo is a great tank with the Zeta, but buff block will really hurt him, so that's just something to consider. JTR Resistance will be a premium lead, and I expect her to be in platoons a bunch, which we already confirmed that she is. If she's not, then the standard Resistance team should be quite strong. Once you get BB's Illuminated Destiny off, you're pretty much home free. C-3PO could be removed, and you really have 2 flex spots depending on kind of what you need to run. Holdo is worth considering as a tanky tank. With or in place of Fenn, if you're worried about not having enough meat shield to keep the droids alive. I think JTR is just generally going to be a good team, and I think there's a variety of ways you can build that team and make it still be effective. I think Kira, this is an alternate version of the CLS Han Chewie team, in case you have to put CLS in platoons, which we've already seen there's going to be a lot of. Kira is a great leadership. She provides protection regeneration, nice passive buffs based on each role. You can pair her with something like Vange, Chewie, and L3, so you end up with a very tanky team. You end up with 5s, you end up with L3 who can taunt over and over and cleanse debuffs and do all kinds of crazy things. I think this team will be a go-to for a lot of people who end up not being able to use CLS. I think Kira opens up quite a nice few options for synergy with Scoundrels versus just looking at Rebels. Then you have the Stormtrooper Han +4. I talked quite a bit about Stormtrooper Han already. But this team could end up being sort of a catch-all that works out fairly well. And then we think I've got Karth, Old Republic. I think this team is not going to perform well, but I have it on the list as it's a specific faction. There are no circumstances where you take Karth over OR over something like Jedi Knight Revan lead. And I think just landing the debuffs are going to be very, very difficult. And then you have Fen lead. I have this down here at the bottom. I think Fen lead is probably not going to be very good either, but this is kind of one of those off-meta options that you might use in the event that you can't use your Jedi training ray. And then I have a kind of a late mention of Tebow, and while Tebow isn't particularly great, his leadership is ubiquitous for allies, meaning that it can be used. I talked a little bit about him earlier when I was talking about specific leaderships. And then I think outside of this, you're going to definitely be dipping down into characters that are going to be less usable really than anything else. So I think this kind of shores up the list of kind of meta or non-meta or off-brand teams that I think we're going to likely be able to use and be relatively successful in light side Geo territory battle.